A clever millionaire abandons his fiancée one day before the wedding to reunite with his divorced first love. The Manhattan skyline sparkled like scattered diamonds against the twilight sky as Pauletta Washington stood on the balcony of their 45th floor penthouse. Her 4-carat engagement ring caught the last rays of sunlight, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across her silk blouse. Behind her, Clint Eastwood, billionaire tech mogul and the man who had swept her off her feet 2 years ago, was hosting another of his legendary charity galas. "To my beautiful fiancée," his voice carried across the room, filled with New York's elite, "who made me believe in second chances." Their guests raised crystal champagne flutes, but Pauletta's heart soared higher than any skyscraper. She remembered their first meeting like it was yesterday, a chance encounter at a small coffee shop in the West Village, where she had spilled her latte all over his $12,000 Tom Ford suit. Instead of being angry, he had laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "I needed an excuse to buy a new one anyway," he had said, helping her clean up the mess. That simple moment of kindness from a man who could buy and sell half of Manhattan had captured her heart. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jet getaways to Paris for impromptu dinner dates, helicopter rides to the Hamptons for weekend escapes, and intimate moments that felt stolen from a romance novel. Clint would have fresh peonies, her favorite flowers, delivered to her non-profit office every Monday morning, each bouquet accompanied by handwritten notes that she kept in a special box by her bedside. "You make me want to be better," he had whispered one night as they danced alone on the rooftop of his building, the city lights creating their own constellation below. "Before you, I was just accumulating wealth. Now I know what it means to accumulate moments." Social media couldn't get enough of them. Their love story played out like a modern fairy tale across Instagram and Twitter, the self-made billionaire and the passionate humanitarian worker who taught him to use his wealth for good. Together, they had launched education initiatives, built schools in underdeveloped countries, and created scholarship programs for underprivileged students. The wedding plans were a testament to their combined vision. Yes, it would be lavish, held at the Ritz-Carlton, with a guest list reading like a who's who of global influencers, but they had requested donations to their charitable foundation in lieu of gifts. Pauletta had chosen a custom Vera Wang gown that made her feel like royalty, while Clint had surprised her by hiring her favorite musician to perform at the reception. Their wedding registry wasn't filled with crystal vases or silver platters. Instead, each guest could sponsor a year's education for a child in need. "This is why I love you," Clint had said when she proposed the idea, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "You never forget where you came from, and you always think of others first." The gossip columns dubbed them Manhattan's golden couple, but in private moments they were simply Clint and Pauletta, two people who had found their missing piece. He would cook her breakfast on Sunday mornings, though he could never quite get the eggs right, and she would straighten his tie before important meetings, their daily rituals becoming the foundation of their love. "Promise me this is forever," she had whispered one night, curled into his side as they watched the city lights twinkle below their bedroom window. "I promise," he had replied, his voice certain and strong. "You're my last first kiss, Pauletta Washington." Looking back, perhaps she should have noticed the subtle changes that began 3 months before the wedding. The way his smile sometimes didn't quite reach his eyes when they discussed flower arrangements. How he would stare at his phone for longer than usual, his brow furrowed in thought. The midnight walks he started taking alone, claiming he needed to clear his head about upcoming business decisions. But love has a way of blinding us to the obvious, of painting every red flag in rose-colored hues. Pauletta was busy living their fairy tale, too enchanted by the promise of their future to notice the shadows creeping into their present. She threw herself into wedding preparations, coordinating with their army of planners, designers, and coordinators, each decision bringing them closer to what she believed would be the perfect beginning to their perfect life. The night of their rehearsal dinner, Clint had seemed particularly attentive, almost desperately so. He kept holding her hand, pulling her close, as if trying to memorize every detail of her presence. "You're acting strange," she had teased, straightening his pocket square. "Just nervous about tomorrow," he had replied. But there was something in his eyes, something that, in retrospect, looked a lot like goodbye. If only she had known that their fairy tale was about to shatter into a million pieces, that the man who had promised her forever was harboring a secret that would turn their perfect love story into Manhattan's most talked-about scandal. But as she stood on that balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars brought down to earth, Pauletta Washington was still living in the beautiful bubble of what she thought was unstoppable love. Little did she know that destiny had other plans, and that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings lead to the most heartbreaking endings. But then again, perhaps endings are just beginnings in disguise, waiting to show us what real love truly looks like. Signs we all missed. Looking back, the warning signs were scattered like breadcrumbs along their path to what should have been wedded bliss. Spring was blooming in Central Park when Pauletta first noticed the subtle shift in Clint's behavior, though at the time she dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters and the stress of his latest business acquisition. It started with the small things, the way he would drift off during their wedding planning meetings, his eyes distant and unfocused as their planner discussed floral arrangements and table settings. Once passionate about every detail of their future together, he now responded with distracted, "Whatever you think is best, darling," to her questions about their honeymoon villa in the Maldives. Their morning routine, once a cherished ritual of coffee and shared dreams on their terrace, became increasingly sporadic. Early meetings, he would text, or working breakfast with investors. Pauletta would find herself alone, watching dawn break over Manhattan, his untouched coffee growing cold beside her. The photo albums were perhaps the most telling sign, leather-bound memories of their 2 years together that she would often find him studying late at night. But it wasn't their photos he was lost in. One evening, she discovered him in his study, an old box open on his desk. Inside were photographs from his college days, and in many of them, a striking woman with auburn hair appeared beside a younger, carefree Clint. "Just clearing out some old things," he had said quickly, closing the box when he noticed Pauletta in the doorway. "You never told me about her," Pauletta had remarked casually, trying to ignore the knot forming in her stomach. "Ancient history," he replied, but his voice caught slightly on the words. That night, he held her tighter than usual in bed, as if seeking absolution for thoughts he wouldn't share. Their intimate moments began to feel different too. His kisses, while still tender, carried a hint of desperation, as if he was trying to convince himself of something. During their engagement photo shoot in the Hamptons, the photographer had to repeatedly ask Clint to look at the camera instead of staring pensively at the horizon. The changes in his philanthropic involvement were subtle but significant. The education foundation they had built together, their shared passion project, suddenly seemed to interest him less. Board meetings he would have never missed before were delegated to his assistants. "I trust your judgment completely," he would say, but the words felt like a gentle distancing rather than a vote of confidence. Their friends noticed too, though no one dared to voice their concerns to the bride-to-be. Victoria, Pauletta's maid of honor, would later confess that she had seen Clint at Le Bernardin, sitting alone at the bar, twirling his engagement ring around his finger with a troubled expression. When she approached him, he had quickly ordered another scotch and changed the subject to market forecasts. Even their social media presence, once a stream of genuine moments and shared adventures, began to feel choreographed. The captions on his posts grew shorter, more perfunctory. "Beautiful evening with my fiancée" replaced the heartfelt paragraphs he once wrote about their love story. The comments section still gushed about their perfect relationship, but something in his smile seemed forced in every new photo. During their last dinner party before the wedding, Pauletta had caught a glimpse of Clint standing alone on their balcony, phone in hand, staring at something on the screen with an intensity that made her heart skip. When she approached, he quickly switched to his email, but not before she caught a flash of what looked like a social media profile, one that didn't belong to her. The wedding gifts had started arriving, each one a beautiful reminder of their impending nuptials. But while Pauletta would excitedly open each package, Clint's enthusiasm seemed to dim with every ribbon untied. "We should have just asked for charitable donations," he said one evening, surrounded by crystal and silver. The comment stung. It had been his idea to have a traditional registry alongside, their charitable one. Their last dance class for their wedding waltz was particularly telling. As they moved across the studio floor, Clint kept missing steps he had perfected weeks ago. "I can't seem to focus," he apologized, but his eyes held a storm of emotions that had nothing to do with forgotten choreography. That night, he spent hours in his home office, door closed, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. The wedding planner had started to show signs of concern, though she masked it well. "Mr. Eastwood hasn't responded about the final menu selection," she would whisper to her assistant, not realizing Pauletta could hear. "And he still hasn't written his vows." Each missed deadline, each delayed decision, was another crack in the foundation of their seemingly perfect world. Perhaps the most glaring sign came during their final venue walkthrough at the Ritz. As they stood in the grand ballroom where they would soon exchange vows, Clint's phone buzzed with a message. The color drained from his face as he read it, and for a moment Pauletta saw something that looked remarkably like longing flash across his features. "Just work," he said quickly, but his hands trembled slightly as he pocketed the phone. The other woman's return. The crisp autumn air carried whispers of change as Sarah Mitchell made her dramatic re-entrance into Clint's life at the annual Manhattan Children's Hospital Charity Gala. She stood at the top of the marble staircase, a vision in emerald silk that seemed to catch every light in the ballroom. 8 years of marriage to a British aristocrat had only enhanced her natural grace, and her recent divorce had added an air of mysterious vulnerability that turned heads throughout the room. Clint's reaction was visceral. Pauletta felt his hand tighten around his champagne flute, heard the almost imperceptible catch in his breath. It was subtle. Most wouldn't have noticed. But to her, it was like a thunderclap in a quiet room. "Sarah," he whispered, so softly it might have been just an exhale, but that single word carried the weight of 1,000 unfinished stories. Their first meeting across the crowded ballroom was like a scene from a classic film. Sarah descended the stairs, her hand trailing elegantly along the banister, while conversations around her gradually hushed. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but her eyes never left Clint's face. When they finally stood before each other, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken history. "Hello, Clint," Sarah said, her voice carrying the slight hints of a British accent acquired during her years abroad. "It's been too long." The pause in her sentence held volumes of untold tales and regrets. Pauletta watched as something shifted in Clint's eyes, like curtains being drawn back from windows that had long been shuttered. "Sarah, you look—" Clint stumbled over his words, something Pauletta had never witnessed before. This was a man who commanded boardrooms and gave speeches to thousands without breaking a sweat. Yet here he was, tripping over simple greetings like a schoolboy. "You haven't changed a bit," he finally managed. The story of their past emerged in pieces throughout the evening, each detail another twist of the knife in Pauletta's heart. They had been college sweethearts at Yale, the golden couple everyone expected to last forever. But ambition and timing had torn them apart. Clint was building his first startup, sleeping on friends' couches and pouring every penny into his dream. Sarah had received an offer to study art history at Oxford, and a whirlwind romance with a visiting British lord had swept her across the Atlantic. "Do you remember that tiny coffee shop in New Haven?" Sarah asked later that evening, her voice soft with nostalgia. "The one with the horrible paintings but the best maple lattes." Clint's laugh in response was different, younger somehow, unburdened by the weight of his billions and business empire. Pauletta watched as they fell into an easy rhythm of shared memories and inside jokes. Each story they recalled seemed to erase the years between them, drawing them back to a time before success, before marriages and divorces, before her. She noticed how Sarah would touch Clint's arm when she laughed, how his body would unconsciously lean toward her when she spoke. The photographs from the gala told their own story. While Pauletta stood perfectly poised in her designer gown, it was the candid shots that revealed the truth. Clint and Sarah in animated conversation, their faces lit with the kind of joy that comes from rediscovering something precious you thought was lost forever. In the weeks that followed, Sarah seemed to materialize everywhere in their lives. She joined the hospital's fundraising committee, which Clint chaired. She purchased an apartment just 3 blocks from their penthouse. She appeared at their regular restaurants, their social events, always apologizing for the coincidence with a smile that suggested it was anything but. Their interactions became more frequent, more intimate. Coffee meetings to discuss charity work stretched into long lunches. Professional emails evolved into text messages that made Clint smile at his phone in a way that Pauletta's messages hadn't for months. The air around them hummed with unfinished business and second chances. Sarah's divorce had left her with not just her freedom, but also with a fresh perspective on life. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what really matters," she said one evening at a dinner party, her eyes meeting Clint's across the table. The words hung in the air like a challenge, or perhaps an invitation. The society columns quickly picked up on the undercurrent of tension. "Former Flames Reunite at Charity Gala," read one headline. "Tech Billionaire's Fiancée Faces Competition from the Past," suggested another. Each article was accompanied by photos that captured glances, touches, moments that seemed too intimate for old friends. The change in Clint became more pronounced. He started wearing the cologne he'd worn in college. Sarah had mentioned remembering it. He dug out his old leather jacket from their Yale days, the one he'd kept but never worn. Small changes that spoke volumes about where his thoughts were dwelling. One evening, Pauletta found a handwritten note that had fallen from Clint's pocket. "Some loves never die. They just wait for the right moment to bloom again," it read in elegant script she didn't recognize. She placed it back in his jacket, her hands trembling, but said nothing. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. 24 hours before "I do," dawn broke over Manhattan with deceptive serenity on what should have been the day before the wedding of the year. Pauletta stood in the private bridal suite at Bergdorf Goodman, surrounded by crystals and ivory silk, her $300,000 custom Vera Wang gown being adjusted for the final time. The morning light streaming through the windows created a halo effect around her reflection, but there was an inexplicable heaviness in her heart. Her phone buzzed at precisely 9:47 a.m. A text from Clint. "We need to talk. Now, please." 3 simple sentences that made the room spin. Her mother, who had flown in from Atlanta, noticed her daughter's face pale. "Sweetheart?" she asked, concern etching her features. But Pauletta was already moving, the rustling of her silk robe echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Continue with the alterations," she managed to tell the seamstress. "I'll be back in an hour." It was a promise she wouldn't keep. The ride to their penthouse was an eternity compressed into 15 minutes. The elevator's ascent to the 45th floor felt like a journey to the gallows. When the doors opened, she found Clint standing by their floor-to-ceiling windows, still in his running clothes, his usual morning ritual abandoned halfway. He didn't turn around immediately, and in his reflection, she saw tears. "I thought I could do it," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I could be the man you deserve, the man who would make you happy forever." Finally he turned, and the devastation in his eyes told her everything before he spoke another word. "Sarah?" It wasn't really a question. Pauletta's voice was surprisingly steady, even as her world began to crumble. "I never stopped loving her," Clint confessed, the words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "I buried it, convinced myself it was in the past. Meeting you, you showed me how to love again, Pauletta. You're incredible, perfect in every way, but seeing her again—" He crossed the room, reached for her hands, but stopped short. "Last night, after the rehearsal dinner, Sarah came to my office. She said she's still in love with me, that she never should have left, that her entire marriage was an attempt to forget what we had." The city continued its morning bustle below, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. A cleaning lady hummed in the next room, the mundane sound a stark contrast to the moment's gravity. "The invitations," Pauletta whispered. 500 guests. The president sending a representative. The foundation announcement we planned." "I'll handle everything," Clint said quickly. "The financial aspect, the cancellations, the press. You won't have to deal with any of it. I can't marry you tomorrow knowing my heart belongs to someone else. It would destroy both of us eventually." Pauletta walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, a young couple walked hand in hand, their laughter floating up like a cruel reminder of happier times. "When did you know," she asked, "that you would do this?" "Last night," he answered, his voice breaking. "Sarah and I talked until dawn. We tried to fight it, both of us, but some loves, they're like gravity. You can resist for a while, but eventually—" The irony wasn't lost on her. How many times had she admired this view with him, planning their future? Now she stood in the same spot, watching that future dissolve like morning mist. "Your mother's emerald ring," she said quietly, slipping it off her finger. The 4-carat stone caught the light one last time before she placed it on the marble counter. "You should have it back. It belongs to a love story that started long before ours." Clint's sharp intake of breath told her she'd hit a nerve. The ring had been his grandmother's, then his mother's, and Sarah had worn it first, all those years ago at Yale. Another sign she had missed or chosen to ignore. "The foundation," he started, but she cut him off. "Keep it running. Those children need the scholarships more than I need to erase you from my life." Her professional mask slipped into place, the one she used for tough negotiations. "I'll have my things out by tonight. The apartment in Tribeca is in my name. I'll go there." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and barely contained chaos. Their wedding planner nearly fainted. The Ritz's events manager was diplomatically understanding. Their shared assistant burst into tears. Through it all, Pauletta maintained a dignity that would later be praised in every society column. As evening approached, she stood in his bedroom one last time, surrounded by half-packed suitcases. A photo caught her eye, their first charity gala together, both of them laughing at something off-camera. She left it on the nightstand, face down. "I never meant to hurt you," Clint said from the doorway, watching her pack. "The funny thing is," she replied, carefully folding a cashmere sweater he had given her for Christmas, "I believe you. But sometimes, The deepest wounds come from the kindest hearts. The public scandal. The news broke like a tsunami across Manhattan's social landscape. Page 6's headline screamed, "Billion-dollar heartbreak. Tech mogul dumps bride for college sweetheart." Within hours, as Weddinggate and A Jacques pour Pauletta were trending nationwide. The story had everything: money, betrayal, a jilted bride, and a rekindled flame. TMZ obtained security footage from Clint's office building showing Sarah entering at 11:43 p.m. after the rehearsal dinner and leaving at dawn. Her emerald dress wrinkled, mascara slightly smudged. The timestamp became infamous. 5:47 a.m., the exact moment social media decided that Pauletta's fairy tale officially ended. The paparazzi descended like vultures. They camped outside Pauletta's Tribeca apartment, hoping to catch the first glimpse of the abandoned bride. Instead, they photographed her friends arriving with boxes of tissues and bottles of wine. Victoria, her former maid of honor, punched a photographer who got too close, creating another viral moment. Best friend defends heartbroken bride. Meanwhile, Clint and Sarah were spotted at Café Cluny in the West Village just 3 days after the cancellation. The photos were devastating. Sarah wearing a casual white sundress. The social media critics had a field day with that choice. Clint looking relaxed in jeans and a blue Oxford shirt, their hands intertwined on the table. One particularly damaging shot caught them feeding each other bites of chocolate soufflé, seemingly oblivious to the scandal they'd created. The wedding vendors began to talk. The florist revealed to Vogue that the $180,000 worth of white peonies and orchids had already been flown in from Holland. The Michelin-starred chef shared that the 7-tier cake, decorated with edible gold leaf, had been halfway completed. Each new detail added fuel to the public's fascination and outrage. Their shared social circle fractured dramatically. The city's elite were forced to choose sides. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual gala became a battleground when both Pauletta and the new couple were accidentally invited. The resulting drama made headlines. Met Gala seating chart causes social civil war. Email leaks from the wedding planner's office revealed the extent of the cancellation chaos. 500 hand-calligraphed invitations had to be followed by emergency cancellation notices. The Ritz's grand ballroom, booked for a year, sat empty on what should have been the wedding day. The photos of the vacant space, flowers removed and dance floor bare, went viral as a symbol of shattered dreams. Sarah's ex-husband, the British Lord, added his own twist to the scandal by giving an exclusive interview to the Times of London. "She never stopped wearing his Yale sweatshirt to bed," he revealed, bitter words from across the Atlantic that sent shockwaves through Manhattan society. Clint's company's stock took a hit as number boycott Eastwood gained traction. Female entrepreneurs pulled out of his tech incubator program. The education foundation they'd built together lost several major donors who sided with Pauletta. Corporate America, it seemed, had a heart, and it was breaking. For the woman left at the altar, the wedding gifts became another PR nightmare. Hundreds of packages had arrived from their affluent guest list. Rare art, antique furniture, custom-made jewelry. The process of returning them made headlines. $1 million wedding registry returns, salt in the wound. Some guests, in a show of solidarity with Pauletta, requested their gifts be donated to her charitable causes instead. Perhaps most devastating were the leaked text messages between Clint and Sarah from the months leading up to the cancellation. Their digital trail of rekindled romance played out in newspapers worldwide. Can't Stop Thinking About New Haven and Some Loves Never Die became bitter memes, shared millions of times. Social media influencers who had been set to attend the wedding turned their disappointment into content. Wedding-cancelled videos went viral, with makeup artists who'd been booked for the bridal party doing what would have been tutorials. The wedding hashtag, #, Clint and Pauletta forever, became a sad archive of their seemingly perfect relationship. The final blow came when Vogue, which had planned a 12-page spread on the wedding, instead ran a feature titled "When Forever Ends: The Modern Reality of Disposable Promises." The article, accompanied by previously unpublished engagement photos, became their most read piece of the year. Rising from the ashes. In the depths of winter, when Manhattan's streets were blanketed in snow and the scandal was still fresh, Pauletta Washington made her first public appearance since the cancellation. Not at a glamorous party or society event, but at a small community center in the Bronx. Wearing a simple black turtleneck and pearl earrings, she stood before a group of teenage girls to announce the launch of her new initiative, the Phoenix Foundation, Rising Through Education. "Sometimes life hands you ashes," she began, her voice steady despite the dozens of cameras capturing every moment. But within those ashes lies the seed of something more powerful than what was lost. She announced the commitment of her entire wedding budget, $2 million, to create scholarships for young women from underprivileged backgrounds. The media narrative began to shift. Headlines transformed from "jilted bride" to "woman warrior." Pauletta channeled her pain into purpose, turning her private heartbreak into public hope. She sold every piece of jewelry Clint had given her, including the Harry Winston collection worth millions, and used the funds to establish coding boot camps for inner-city girls. Her TED Talk, titled "The Gift of Goodbye," broke viewing records. Standing on that red circular carpet, she didn't just share her story, she revolutionized the conversation about resilience. "Rock bottom," she said, her words resonating across the globe, "became the foundation on which I built my empire." The transformation was remarkable. She cut her long dark hair into a powerful bob, traded designer gowns for sharp business suits, and began making appearances on CNBC to discuss women in technology. Fortune magazine's cover story, "The Rise of Pauletta Washington," detailed how she turned her nonprofit into a global force for female education. Her Instagram, once filled with couple photos and wedding preparations, became a platform for celebrating women's achievements. Each post that might have shown her wedding journey instead showcased a girl receiving a scholarship, a young woman launching her first startup, a team of female engineers winning a global competition. The workspace she had once shared with Clint in their penthouse was replaced by a light-filled office in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The walls, painted in bright yellows and fierce oranges, displayed artwork created by scholarship recipients. Her team, comprised entirely of women who had faced their own setbacks, became known as the Phoenix Squad. Victoria, her former maid of honor, joined as COO, bringing her Harvard MBA and fierce loyalty to the foundation. Together, they created mentorship programs connecting successful women executives with girls from disadvantaged backgrounds. The waiting list for their programs grew into the thousands. When asked about Clint in interviews, Pauletta's response became legendary. "I thank him now. He taught me that sometimes you have to lose the life you plan to find the life that's waiting for you." The quote went viral, inspiring countless women to reshape their own narratives of loss. The foundation's first graduation ceremony was held exactly 1 year after what would have been her wedding day. Watching 20 young women receive full college scholarships, Pauletta realized she had given birth to something far more meaningful than a marriage. She had created a legacy. Her work caught the attention of global leaders. She was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, where her session on transforming pain into power had people standing in the aisles. Michelle Obama mentioned her in a speech about female education, calling her a phoenix who didn't just rise, she lifted others with her. The most powerful moment came when she returned to Yale, Clint and Sarah's old stomping grounds, to establish a women's leadership center. Standing at the podium in the same hall where their love story had begun, she announced a $10 million commitment to supporting female entrepreneurs. "People expected me to disappear into my pain," she wrote in her viral Medium article. "Instead, I used it as fuel to light up the darkness for others." The piece was optioned for a film, with Hollywood's top actresses vying to tell her story of transformation. An unexpected twist. The United Nations Global Summit on Education wasn't meant to be a turning point in Pauletta Washington's love story. She was there to deliver a keynote speech about her foundation's success in transforming the lives of over 10,000 young women. But fate, it seemed, had other plans that September evening in Geneva. Dr. James Richardson, renowned for establishing medical schools in conflict zones, sat in the third row. His steel-grey eyes never left the stage as Pauletta spoke about turning personal devastation into global change. He wasn't supposed to be there. His flight from Syria had been delayed by a sandstorm, and he'd almost missed the conference entirely. Their first interaction was hardly romantic. During the Q&A session, he challenged her approach. "Impressive numbers, Ms. Washington. But how do we ensure these educated women have access to adequate healthcare in their communities?" His British accent carried across the auditorium, and for the first time in months, Pauletta felt her heart skip a beat. The debate continued through coffee breaks and panel discussions. James spoke passionately about his work building hospitals in war-torn regions, while Pauletta defended her focus on education. Their intellectual sparring caught the attention of other delegates, who watched with knowing smiles as these two forces of nature circled each other. "You're incredibly frustrating," she told him over late-night room service in the conference hotel. "And you're beautifully stubborn," he replied, his eyes twinkling as he stole a fry from her plate. They talked until dawn about their shared vision of a world where every girl had access to both education and healthcare. The media, always hungry for updates about Manhattan's most famous jilted bride, missed the story entirely at first. James and Pauletta kept their growing connection private, communicating through long email exchanges about potential collaboration between their organizations. Their first official date happened in a makeshift clinic in Lebanon, where they worked side by side treating refugees while discussing curriculum development. Unlike her whirlwind romance with Clint, this relationship built slowly, thoughtfully. James didn't send expensive gifts or arrange elaborate surprises. Instead, he sent her medical journals with highlighted passages, asked her opinion on healthcare policies, and challenged her thinking about sustainable development. "He sees me," Pauletta confided to Victoria during a late-night strategy session, "not as the woman who was left at the altar, not as a socialite turned philanthropist, but as me. Messy ideas, strong opinions, and all." Their first public appearance together wasn't at a glittering gala, but at a fundraiser for emergency medical training in underprivileged schools. They announced their relationship not through a PR statement, but by jointly publishing a research paper on integrating healthcare education into existing scholarship programs. The New York Times finally caught on 6 months later, running a feature titled "Love Heals: The Revolutionary Romance-Changing Global Education." The article noted how their combined approaches had already created 3 pilot programs in different continents, merging medical training with traditional education. When James proposed, it wasn't with a massive diamond in a fancy restaurant. It happened during a vaccine drive in a remote village in Kenya. He handed her a simple silver band made by local artisans and said, "I think we could save more lives together than apart." Pauletta's yes was interrupted by the squeals of children they were there to help. Their wedding plans shocked Manhattan society. No elaborate ceremony at the Ritz, no designer gown, no celebrity guest list. Instead, they chose to get married in the first school clinic they had built together in Rwanda. The bride wore a dress made by her scholarship recipients, and in lieu of gifts, they asked for donations to build more integrated education healthcare centers. Love's true lesson. In the end, Manhattan's most talked about love story wasn't about betrayal, but about destiny's masterful plan. On a bright spring morning 3 years after the wedding that never was, Pauletta and James stood hand in hand at the opening of their 10th integrated school clinic complex, this one ironically located just blocks from where Clint's office building stood. The media couldn't resist drawing comparisons. Clint and Sarah's relationship had fizzled out within 8 months of the cancelled wedding, their love story proving as fleeting as morning dew. The fairy tale romance that had captured New York's imagination had crumbled under the weight of reality and rushed decisions. Sometimes, the wrong path leads you to the right destination, Pauletta shared in her best-selling memoir, Rising. What I thought was my greatest heartbreak became my greatest awakening. The book, now translated into 47 languages, had become required reading in women's leadership programs worldwide. The Phoenix Foundation, now merged with James's Global Health Initiative, had transformed into an unstoppable force. Their revolutionary approach of combining education with healthcare had created a new model for international development. The United Nations adopted their framework as a blueprint for sustainable community development. Pauletta and James's love story became legendary not for its glamour, but for its purpose. Their date nights often involved reviewing medical supplies in war-torn countries or brainstorming curriculum changes for their programs. Their passion wasn't expressed through expensive gifts, but through shared victories. Every new school opened, every life saved, every girl educated. On their first wedding anniversary, James surprised Pauletta not with jewelry, but with the news that their program had reached 1 million beneficiaries. Their celebration involved inaugurating a new medical training center in Detroit, cutting a ribbon together while trading secret smiles that spoke volumes about how far they'd come. Their children, twins born a year into their marriage, grew up between continents, equally comfortable in boardrooms and refugee camps. Little Maya and Alexander became symbols of their parents' legacy, already showing signs of inheriting both their mother's educational vision and their father's healing touch. In a twist of fate that seemed almost scripted, Clint attended one of their foundation's fundraisers 5 years later. He watched from the back as Pauletta and James presented their latest initiative, their natural synchronicity and shared passion evident to all. After the presentation, he approached them. "You found what I couldn't give you," he said simply to Pauletta. "Purpose beyond passion." The moment was captured by a photographer, 3 people whose lives had been irrevocably intertwined, sharing a genuine smile. The photo went viral, not for its drama, but for its message of healing and growth. As Pauletta often told her scholarship recipients, "Real love doesn't diminish you. It expands your world. It doesn't just make your heart beat faster, it makes your soul grow bigger." Their story became more than just another society tale. It became a beacon of hope, proving that sometimes life's greatest disappointments are merely redirections to something far more magnificent. The cancelled wedding that once dominated headlines was now just a footnote in a much greater love story, one that had changed thousands of lives across the globe. In their private moments, James would still tease Pauletta about their first debate at the UN summit. "You were so passionate about proving me wrong," he'd say, to which she'd reply, "And now we're both right, together." The last line of Pauletta's memoir summed it up perfectly. "The universe didn't break my heart. It broke my expectations to give me something far greater, a love that heals not just 2 people, but the world." A message of hope and transformation. Dear readers, Life's greatest betrayals often become our most powerful catalysts for transformation. Pauletta and James's story teaches us several timeless truths that can inspire anyone facing heartbreak or disappointment. 1. Pain has purpose. When your world shatters, remember that those broken pieces can be reformed into something even more beautiful. Pauletta's heartbreak didn't define her, it refined her. Your darkest moment might just be the beginning of your brightest chapter. 2. True love enhances your purpose. Real love doesn't just make your heart flutter, it makes your impact greater. It doesn't diminish your dreams, it amplifies them. When James entered Pauletta's life, he didn't just offer romance, he offered partnership in changing the world. Wait for someone who doesn't just love your presence, but loves your purpose. 3. Timing is divine. What seems like terrible timing often turns out to be perfect orchestration. If Clint hadn't left, Pauletta would never have found her true calling or her true partner. Sometimes a no is the universe making way for a better yes. 4. Success is the best reply. Instead of seeking revenge or dwelling in bitterness, Pauletta chose to succeed spectacularly. She turned her $1 million wedding budget into a $1 billion impact. Remember, your greatest comeback won't be what you say, it will be what you do. 5. Authenticity attracts authenticity. While her first relationship was built on society's expectations, her love with James grew from genuine shared values and vision. Be authentically yourself, and you'll attract someone who loves not just your smile, but your soul. Most importantly, remember that your story isn't over until you say it is. One cancelled wedding, one betrayal, one heartbreak. These are just chapters, not the conclusion. Your happy ending might look different from what you imagined, but it might also be far more magnificent than what you planned. Trust the journey, even when it hurts. Trust your heart, even after it breaks. Trust your worth, even when others don't see it. And most importantly, trust that sometimes losing love is the universe making space for a love that will change not just your world, but the world. Your heartbreak could be the beginning of your breakthrough. Your end could be your most powerful beginning. Your devastation could become your destination. Because sometimes, like Pauletta discovered, the most beautiful love stories don't start with once upon a time. They start with after everything fell apart. Keep rising, keep shining, keep believing. Your true love story is still being written.